Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to get started. Today is November 19th. This is the Planning and Economic Development Land Use Committee. Ryan, can you do the roll call, please?
Valorant.
Here.
Zamer.
Here.
Howie.
Here.
Clark. Adams. 3 committee members present. We're also joined by council members Flynn and Donane.
Okay, so we're going to get started. We're going to make some changes to the agenda just for the public to know. We're going to start with Ordinance 66, 11124, and then we're going to go to Ordinance 299124. But first we'll start with public comment. We've got a very busy day, so we can, how many people do we have for public comment? Okay, so we're going to start with the 4 in person. We'll give everyone 5 minutes to speak in person. Is there anyone else that wants to speak? Okay, so who's in person?
Patricia Morrison, and then Tim, I think the next one.
Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna let you handle that. So, because we have so many people signed up, I thought we had less, we're gonna do 3 minutes of public comment per person, so we can get through everybody. After we do the in-person public comments, we'll go to the agenda, and when we finish the agenda, if it's depending on the time, we will then read the written comments into the record. Okay? If you can just get us started with our first public comment.
Richard Conti.
Point of order. So we're doing public comments for all 3. We're not going to do an ordinance public comment for that one, and then.
Now we're going to do all of it combined, get it done with, and then get the ordinance one at a time.
So we're not going to question any of the people up here for right now? Unless they want to stick around, they can, for a point of clarification.
As of right now, no. It's just public comment.
Okay.
So it's not a back and forth conversation at this point.
Okay.
If people want to stay once that bill gets put forward and they have some information they'd like to share, we can take that information. But right now, it's just asking the public to share their comments.
There we go. I didn't look underneath the thing there. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Richard Conti, reside at 151 Chestnut Street in the city of Albany. And I'm speaking on the cabaret ordinance. Excuse me. So this morning, in advance of tonight's meeting, I did send committee members a copy of my detailed written comments on the proposed pending amendment to Ordinance 1753-24 related to cabarets. I'll try and summarize some of the key points here. But first, I obviously have a perspective on this that issue and experience that goes back to when the original cabaret ordinance was adopted. And by the way, I was not a sponsor or author of that proposal. I believe that the current system can and should be reformed, whether that's through amendment to the current cabaret ordinance or through adoption of a land use procedure. However, any process must be balanced considering commercial and residential uses within a neighborhood and have clear enforcement provisions. This topic should not be a debate which pits one side against another, but an open, honest discussion which finds balance. On the proposed amendment, and these are to summarize my earlier memorandum that I sent this morning. Overall, if this is a land use option, the provisions should be wholly contained within the USDO for purposes of transparency and clarity. As currently structured, you need to jump back and forth between two separate chapters of the code, and that's a recipe for confusion. The use of a noise violation as outlined in the proposed amendment is subjective and will vary based on the interpretation of a responding enforcement officer. There needs to be an objective standard, one that possibly measures decibel levels that would be tailored to particular zoning districts. Enforcement officers need to be trained on how to determine a noise violation. There is no clear guidance to the BZA on how to decide an appeal of a stop work order. This is particularly important because the determination of a violation is subjective and made without documentation. It's unclear on who or how the stop work order is issued, what the immediate or longer-term impact is, or how it's lifted. The ordinance delegates to be determined implementation authority and procedure to the Department of Neighborhood Services. That process should be spelled out in the ordinance and not left to a post-adoption administrative process. There are changes to hours of operation for outdoor sidewalk and patio cafes, as well as authority for outside music. These provisions should be deleted and considered separately. At the very least, the provisions related to outdoor patio cafes should be stricken. These are venues which, in a mixed-use corridor, often directly abut a dense residential neighborhood or use where amplified music would be problematic. Generally speaking, if you're moving to a land use process, you need to take a deeper dive into the USDO and appropriate uses in various zoning districts. One size does not fit all when it comes to land use policy. That's why we have zoning. Living in the Lark Street area, which is surrounded by densely populated residential uses, I value the diversity of a mixed-use corridor which has a variety of uses and serves the surrounding neighborhoods. That is the hallmark of creating walkable neighborhoods. A successful mixed-use corridor needs strong surrounding densely populated residential neighborhoods, a variety of commercial uses that serve the surrounding neighborhood and contribute to walkability, and a vibrant, compatible nightlife. The trick is finding the balance. Coming to a conclusion cannot be rushed. It needs work and time, but it is possible, and it needs to have all parties with a stake at the table. Thank you. So I do, again, I think the pending ordinance or amendment does need a lot of further work before it can move. I did also saw the statement that Councilmember Romero submitted earlier today, and she also saw my statement, and we both agree with each other. So I just wanted to make sure that the committee was aware of that, where that Councilmember Romero and I are on the same page. And again, I would urge you to, if you haven't, to read the more detailed memorandum I sent out this morning, which is 4 pages, but really is more detailed in terms of pointing out some of the concerns and issues that I have with the pending amendment and areas of clarity and that really need to be addressed in a number of ways. But you can do something, but you need to bring the parties together so that we can work this through. Thank you.
Can I make a small request? I know you've got another meeting you've got to run to.
Yes.
If that meeting ends and we're still...
I'm sorry?
If that meeting ends early and we're still in discussion, would you mind coming back and joining us, just because you have a unique perspective as former council member and future council member of that ward?
Sure. Yeah, I'll see what it is. I know we are discussing the equity agenda. We have some departmental presentations, and then we're going to be discussing recommendations and report on our report that we have to file with the council by December 21st, so it may well be a lengthy meeting. But I will see where you are.
Well, thank you. Our next speaker, please.
We have Patricia Morrison. Patricia Morrison. Tim Holm.
Thank you for your time today. My name is Tim Holm. I'm a resident of the 6th Ward. I live on Spring Street in Albany. I guess I would just like to share my perspective as a resident. I live on Spring Street, as I mentioned. I live, my bedroom's on an alleyway that I share with other residents, as well as a nightclub. We've had some ongoing issues there with noise and with music. Going late into the night, and you know we've experienced some mitigation at times, especially since Department of Buildings got involved. But again, it's ongoing, and I guess as a resident of a space like that, I'm concerned about the proposed legislation and how it might address a space where a commercial interest and a residential interest share, for example, an alleyway, or they share a business's patio. It abuts somebody's bedroom. And I'm not sure that the proposed legislation really addresses that. So that's one concern. And I think the sort of standards of sound and outline of enforcement do raise a lot of questions, particularly standards of sound seem subjective and could use clarification. And yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think my concerns as a resident have less to do with the noise inside the business, and it's more about the noise that's escaping the business and whether it's affecting my experience as a resident in the community. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Apologies if I mispronounce it, but Jeannie Marie Duran?
Hello, good evening. Well, it's kind of loud. My name's Jenny Marie Duran, and I live at 355 State Street. And I have a very strong perspective about the amendments to the cabaret law. I think what I'll share with you is my own personal story to give you my perspective of how we need to really look at the impact that it will have on families and balancing. You know, I patronize local business. I'm all about Albany thriving. My father owned his own business, but I also like and enjoy and respect the peace and quiet of my own home. I am a mother of twin daughters who study a lot, and my experience is I share an alleyway with a bar, and in that alleyway, there are many times when there are people that are in the alleyway, and not to be gendered, but there are sometimes men in the alleyway, and I have young teenage daughters, I'm just gonna say it, and we can't open our blinds. They can't open their blinds because we hear cursing, we see people peer in our window. It's that close and parallel. The noise, and I even have a sample of the noise if you all want to hear it, just to get real live perspective from my room with the window closed, is such that we are not able to sleep, period. And that needs to be balanced. I think that it can be balanced, it can coexist. There are other bars that are even closer to where I live, and it's balanced, and I don't have that problem. But I think that laws have to be respected. I'm a graduate of UV Law School. I'm all about laws being respected and laws being balanced and looking at precedent and looking at how do communities live together, whether it's business communities and residential communities. But I am very, very strongly opinionated when it comes to when those laws are not followed And when there is not balance, and when there is not consideration of the residents and the community of which a business exists.
You have a little bit of time left. Do you want us to hear it, just so that?
I do. So here is an example of the noise that I hear from my room, me and my daughters. With the window closed. From my phone, right? That's not balance from my perspective. That's not balanced, and that does not allow me to have peace and enjoyment of my space. But I'm all about patronizing businesses. I think that businesses should exist. I'm all about Albany thriving.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Craig Earl.
Hello. I believe what people have been talking about is the amendments of the cabaret license, which I haven't been privy to. I haven't seen those. I know last time I was here, we spoke about the repealing of the cabaret license, and the reason I was, very strong on repealing the cabaret license is because of the use of the enforcement of the cabaret license. As long as I've known and as long as I can remember, when you want to get rid of a place, you take away their cabaret license, and very soon that business will close. That has been the reality of the cabaret license for the last decade. I've been a resident in this community for my entire life, and I've been a resident of the DJ nightlife community for the last 17 years. And so when this was introduced, it was introduced as a way to regulate which spaces can play live music or just have a system of some sort of checks and balances. But what it has been, like I said, over the last 10 years, is a way to shut down businesses that you don't want in your neighborhood. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of businesses that Black people frequent, and it's like, all right, you guys have this going on here, let me send code over there, let's get this place shut down. So that's why I've been very, outspoken about repealing it. I currently am the GM of the Fuse Box. We have a cabaret license. This doesn't necessarily affect us, but as a member of this community at large, I do believe that the cabaret license has had a negative impact on the city of Albany as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you.
Romario McDowell.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Romario McDowell. I'm one of the owners of the Red Room. I'm here today because this is like the second meeting that I've been to. The first one was on September 10th, and now we're back here today. My views remain the same. I believe that this cabaret license should be repealed, very similar to what Craig has mentioned. The reason for this is because the cabaret license has crippled a lot of businesses from reaching its full potential. And for someone that has spent almost 3 years obtaining my state liquor authority license, and then you're finally able to run your business, and then now you have codes coming to your business telling you you can't run your business to its full potential is very, very frustrating. And for some of you who may not be business owners in here, I just want you to take a second, take a perspective, just to look at it from a different perspective for once, or just for at least right now, because if you spend thousands of dollars, hundreds of whatever it may be, into whatever business it is, and then you're being told you can't get to your full potential, it would make anyone upset. You know what I mean? So I just think, like one of the other speakers that came up here and said, maybe like some type of balance. I'm for a balance, but more or less for the repeal of the cabaret license, because at the end of the day, there's people that do live in residential areas close to bars, so it's not to be, you know, inconsiderate or anything like that, but at the same time, it's like, how do you expect people that are business owners that do own bars in these areas to get and make money and stay open? We've been open for a year now, but with the way things are going, it's like, there's no telling if we're gonna reach or get more sales or more people are gonna keep coming in if we're not able to do things like play live music, do karaoke, poetry nights, all of the things that people want to see in bars, social gatherings, or things that we're not able to do. So I just feel like this cabaret license is really crippling a lot of businesses that are in the Albany area from reaching where it needs to be. And I just don't think it's something that we need, and if that's the case that we want to keep it, there has to be something in place that keeps it so it's balanced, so that as a business owner, we still win, and then as a residential, someone that lives in the residence, you guys still are able to live at peace, you know what I mean? So that's all I have to really say. I just want everybody to just take a time and a perspective to just look at it from a business owner's perspective, just knowing that you spend hundreds and thousands of dollars into whatever your passion is or whatever it is, and then knowing that you can't go and do everything that you want to do, and your desires or whatever the case is, because the city of Albany is preventing you from doing that. You know what I mean? So just want everybody to think about that for a second, and that's really my thoughts. That's it.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Nick Warshall.
Give me 1 second. I think we have one more person who wants to get signed up for public comment. Okay. That's okay. We'll get back to you. Thank you.
Good. My name is Nick Workle. I'm the owner of the Larkin Hi-Fi. It exists at 199 Lark Street, and it butts up against the building that exists at 355 State Street. I agree with Rich Conti and Gabriella that obviously, you know, the way it's written, the suggested changes to this law just don't cut it. In some ways, it's almost more vague. They're using language like reasonable person, reasonable volume. You know, this stuff is exactly the stuff that we're trying to get out of this law. We're trying to remove it so that it's objective, not subjective. I'm 100% for the idea that somebody should come in with a decibel reader and there should be a decibel standard that is agreed upon. You know, not trying to ruin anybody's life with loud sound and bother anybody, but I also agree that the enforcement who comes in needs to be trained. They need to know what they're looking for. Again, there's a lot of subjectivity there. We have a lot of people come in and, you know, some of the neighbors at 355 are claiming that it's too loud, but every time the police officers come into my bar, they've actually said that the claims were not corroborated by any sort of evidence. They said when they came there, they actually found it to be rather quiet. So, you know, obviously that's subjective. She might think that it's too loud, where a police officer came and said that it wasn't. So it's like, who decides? What is the standard? It needs to be something that's clear cut and that everybody can understand so we can get on the same page. You know, and another thing just about the cabaret situation is that, you know, I think what it comes down to is a lot of this is you know, we talk about a balance and all this stuff, but, you know, unfortunately, and it sucks to say, but if you're a residential, if you're in a densely populated residential neighborhood and you butt up against a commercial corridor, your space butts up against the back of a bar, there's going to be some residual noise from that commercial district, and that's just the reality. I don't buy, like when I went to purchase a house, I don't like trains, so I didn't buy a house next to the train track. You know what I mean? Because I made a conscious choice. I knew the train track was there. You know what I mean? I would know the risks associated, and I made a conscious choice not to buy a house there, right? These people purchase condos next to a bar, and then we're mad that there was a bar there. It's like, it's not surprising. The bar that I own was a bar since 1936, and it always had live music. So all I've done is bring back a thing that had already been there for almost 100 years. And these people actually, in a written letter to the planning board, the president of the Washington Park Neighborhood Association put in writing that the WPNA preferred the vacant status, the previous status of the building prior to when I took it over, which is actually, that status, yeah, is vacant. So the Washington Park Neighborhood Association prefers vacant spaces to occupied spaces because those spaces are less likely to bring traffic, noise, and the thing that she played for you over her phone, which is just residual noise that is caused by the fact that she made a choice to live 5 feet from a bar. You know, these NIMBYs love to talk about how they support local businesses and they support everything, but it's like, yeah, they'll support you if you're a candle shop and you don't have any customers. You know, if you're a bar that's next to them, it doesn't, you know, if you're bar vegan and no one has gone there in 12 years, but it's like, if you have customers, they hate you because people make sound. They're yelling, they're having fun, and it's like, you want vibrancy, and vibrancy, unfortunately, it makes sound. Those two things go hand in hand. You know, so again, that's pretty much all I have to say about that. I would love for there to be a clear-cut standard. I would love for there to be a decibel standard and have people come in with a decibel reader and tell me, and I would love to be in compliance with a clear law. But at this point, there's a thing called the void for vagueness, where law can't be enforced if the language in the law is too vague for a regular person to understand. And I think that right now, the law falls under that category. The suggested amendments to the law, unfortunately, still fall into that category. So definitely a lot of work is going to have to get done to try to make this something that, that can be enforceable and that can be fair to everybody. But that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to make something clear. The law is the law. So I'm going to encourage everyone to follow the law as we amend this properly. So I just want to make sure I put that out there. So we don't want to encourage or confuse any of our business owners. You know, we are in this process, and that's part of our democratic process, but I want to make sure all of our, you know, that we have a current process right now, which is the current law. So I want to make sure everyone understands we should be following that until there's changes to avoid any potential additional conflicts on this issue. Okay, so that was my point of information. The addition, we have one person that came in late, and how many more speakers do we have?
So we would have Patricia Morrison and then 2 more speakers.
Okay, so let's keep moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to speak after coming in a few minutes late. I want to thank everybody for their service. Having served on a planning board, I understand sometimes these issues get complicated and they can be tension in the air, so I do appreciate your time. I am also a resident of 355 State Street. Earlier today, I sent everybody on this committee a letter. I hope that everybody has received it, and I did copy the one gentleman who is sponsoring the bill. As a resident, I'm looking for balance. I do want to comment on what was just said about my neighbor who also lives at 355 State Street. When she moved in, there was not a bar next door, so I just want to clarify that. So that's the reason why we have these types of licenses, because things change, the fabric of the neighborhood changes. So our neighborhoods rely on this ordinance to help ensure a balance. I did watch the September 9th session that you all had. I was very impressed with the businesses and how they presented themselves. It sounds like there's another issue going on outside of just having an ordinance on how things are processed and how and whether there's prejudice in the processing of that. I think those really concern me as a resident here in the city of Albany. I grew up here. I moved back a few years ago. I feel that the city's economic condition is in a very tough spot. I don't necessarily think doing away with a cabaret license is going to somehow drive up our economic position. So I would, like you to take that into consideration, just repealing this 100%. I really would hope that you would find a balance. There needs to be some type of licensure to protect both sides, quite frankly. I remember one of the committee members saying that they head up the public safety committee, so it really benefits both sides of the house. I have an investment. You talk about hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yes, I have an investment in my property, and I would like to keep the value of my property. And I think we can be together in the neighborhood with certain guidelines, and I do believe that it does make sense to have maybe some more clarity. So I really hope that this doesn't get repealed, and that the detail, they say the devil's in the details. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. So thank you for your service. I hope when you have a moment, I don't know if you're making a vote tonight, if you would take the moment to read my letter, because I just don't want to sit here and read it verbatim. But I felt it was important to come here. There's many other people in the building and in the neighborhood that can't be here tonight, so I'm also representing their voice as well. Thank you.
Thank you. You said, Brian, we have two more? I think there's one more from the crowd. If we can
Yes, so we
add
have-
them.
We have Mike Cohen and then John DeJohn.
I think there's one more person. You can just get his name so we can add him. Give everybody an opportunity to speak, and then we'll move forward. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michael Cohen. With regard to the existing law, I was here before it was passed for the public comment period. And Daniel Herring, the bill sponsor, told us in these chambers that the purpose of the law was to streamline the way music was approved in Albany. That didn't make a lot of sense because we already had a lot of music. If that was the purpose, it utterly failed and had the opposite effect. He also publicly denied that the cabaret law was proposed in order to deal with trouble spots. But considering the power it gave to the city to revoke or not renew a license, everyone knew that was exactly what the law was targeting. Besides, how does giving the city so much control over what happens after a license is granted have anything to do with streamlining the process? And it was never about noise. And if it was about controlling trouble spots and combating gun violence like the shooting at the Plastic nightclub, which preceded the law, that failed too because crime got worse. As far as the new proposal, the replacement, it seems like an overly complicated noise ordinance and is the very definition of arbitrary and capricious. The proposed law includes some kind of mechanism for making complaints. In other words, what happened to me at LAX can still happen under the law. So if a racist neighbor thinks there are too many black people at a bar, they'll be able to call and complain about the noise. Obviously, you can't call the police and complain that there are too many black people on your street. The owners of LAX, under pressure from the city and fearing that they would lose their cabaret license if they didn't do something about the black crowd, asked me to take all the black music out of my songbooks. I quit instead. It cost me a lot of money. It cost LAX a lot of money. Not that I have too much sympathy for them. The proposal doesn't prevent the same thing from happening. Instead, the consequences will just come in the form of a stop work order. I doubt that the police will want to have to deal with these complaints. They have more important things to do, like keeping us safe. This proposal will incentivize the police to issue stop work orders just so that they won't have to deal with these kinds of complaints. Will complainants have to go on record? Will they be anonymous? How will they be tracked? Is someone going to ensure and verify that the complaining party even lives within earshot of an offending quote-unquote establishment? In some ways, this proposed law is even worse. The proposal expands the city's ability to close every bar in the city. The old law just covered bars which offered DJs and bands. This law covers bars with even just a jukebox. Of course, that's one way to go after bars like Cafe Hollywood, which the city couldn't do before. And if you recall, Mayor Sheehan had to exercise emergency COVID powers to close Hollywood. It doesn't seem like the city wants to fix nightlife. This proposal is a transparent attempt by the city to maintain the same kind of control it has under the current cabaret law. It will have the same deleterious effect on nightlife. It will just be accomplished in a different way. Instead of being antagonistic to businesses, can't the city cooperate with them? If there is a legitimate complaint, can't the police just tell a club to lower the volume? How did the city survive without these laws for so long? We survived decades without any kind of cabaret law. Tell me what changed, and I really would like to know what changed, you know, in this city that we had to pass this law. I have an idea about what changed, but nobody ever likes to talk about it. Don't let a few racist or cranky neighbors ruin nightlife for everyone. Obviously, those are the people who complain. The people who are not here, who don't complain, you know, aren't going to show up. It's not healthy for the city, and this proposal doesn't help. I get it, Albany has a problem with crime, but bad acts can happen anywhere, even where there is no music. That's obvious from crime statistics. Stop blaming businesses for crime, blame the criminals. And it's about time that Albany stopped finding ways to marginalize the black community. How about trying to find ways to make people feel like they are valued members of the city? After I quit my gig at LAX, one of my regulars came to me crying and said, "They take everything away from us." It's time Albany found a new direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is John the John.
Didn't think I'd be here again in a different capacity. How are you? My name is John DeJohn. I haven't been a bar owner for around 10 years now. I left in 2015. And the regulations to the city continued to get worse and worse, and controlling the businesses, not understanding that they have, you know, certain needs to be able to run their businesses. If you look back at in the early 2000s, what businesses are still here that were there then? Everybody's gone. You know, let's close them at 2, let's close them at 12, let's close them at 11, you know, let's take music away from them. These people have families, you know, they work hard. They're not here to hurt anyone. And again, we're always criminalized. Again, you know, look at our city now. St. Rose is gone because the kids couldn't go out and have a good time. And now they have parties in their own houses, and who gets raped because there's no security to protect these kids from themselves. Again, you know, like, it's just sad because 10 years later, we're here and we're still arguing about some, you know, this silly law, which these councilmen, when I spoke to Serge, I mean, these are incredible men that are standing up for this, that are trying to change the city. And are they going to get a thank you out of this? No, nobody's going to remember. They're just going to, you know, hopefully they're thanked because, and they're honored for trying to change the city. And I don't think that it's about the music. I think it's about regulations. You can regulate a business until it's closed. Give them a chance, talk to them. The neighborhoods need, the representatives of the neighborhoods should be talking to them, okay? Don't do what Rich Conti did. This is why the city is like it is, like guys like Rich Conti, who write silly memorandums that we haven't even finished it. Obviously, these gentlemen know we haven't even finished it. Let a finished product. If he wants to be a part of the process, come to a meeting, sit with them. I'm sure they would love to talk to him. But let's not hide behind paperwork, and let's talk. We're all human beings. We can do this together. The city will thrive. Again, look around. How many businesses have closed? Hollywood and O-Bar are the only two bars that have been there for what, 30, 40 years. Where's everybody else? You know, I just, listen, I do represent, I want to let everyone know, I do represent a lot of the bars on the street. And this is more to my heart. I love Albany. I lived here for 40 years. I live on Jefferson Street right now. I live across from the Palais Royale, all right? And trust me, I live across from the Palais Royale. Please, give them a chance. Talk to them. We have great representatives, and you guys have to work together. Don't let the squeaky wheel get the grease. Let us all work together, all right? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
James Scott. And that's our final speaker signed up tonight.
Thank you.
Hello, how you guys doing? My name is James Scott. I'm the owner of the Red Room located at 497 Washington Avenue. I just kind of want to speak out from a business owner perspective, as somebody who's like not from Albany, and I came out to Albany for college. I went to UAlbany and then I graduated and ended up opening my business out here. When I first came out here, Albany was really thriving in the night scene, and then I've slowly watched it deteriorate from when I came out here in 2012 all the way to where we are now, where I'm a business owner. I fell in love with what Albany was at one point, which is why I even relocated, which is why I even decided to open a business out here, which is why I made a lot of decisions. And when it boils down, this cabaret law is really the reason as to why a lot of businesses have closed. It's really the reason as to why a lot of people will not stay in Albany. It's like a chain effect. As a lot of my counterparts have said earlier, music isn't the reason for violence. So I think, just to reiterate that, we gotta stop penalizing the business owners for what's going on, and because you feel like they're playing music, that's the issue. It's definitely killing us as business owners who use this income to support our families, and this is like our day-to-day. Just like you guys have jobs, we have jobs too, and it's really weighing heavy on us, and it's hard to get the job done when we're being told that we can't play music in a bar. We try to be as respectful and as considerate as possible to the residents of the Albany community, and as a lot of my counterparts have said, it's nothing that a simple conversation can solve. So I'm sure if police came and said lower the music, or if there was some type of issue, that can be resolved accordingly. But the cabaret law is putting shackles on the wrong people. We should put shackles on the criminals, like a lot of my counterparts have said. Us business owners, we're dying out here. I don't know how else to put it. It's really tough out here. We're all fighting for a demographic of people. Nobody wants to go outside because they already know there's so much rules. How am I gonna enjoy myself? You know what I mean? So it's getting really scarce, and it's only getting more and more scarce. And it's it doesn't make people want to be a business owner. It doesn't make people want to build in Albany. It doesn't, like, it's going to hurt just across the board. Like, whether we want to admit it or not, people like to enjoy themselves. So people want a place where they know there's a thriving nightlife, there's a thriving, like, community. They can go out safely, have a good time, come home. Like, there's security there. Like, and then also just to touch on what somebody has said earlier, as far as this regulation, like, we have to deal with the state liquor authority already. So we already have guidelines, we already have oversight, we already have to have meetings ever so often. Our liquor license is highly regulated. So that oversight already exists. And just to throw another thing out there, in New York City, this same law has existed and was repealed in 2017 off racial bias, off of a lot of things that they found in court was just not plausible. So just to see it up here and out in Albany and thriving, and this is actually a thing, it kind of hurts me because it's like, you know, like it's somewhere, New York City is 2.5 hours away from here, 3 hours at most. Like, so to see a place there get rid of it in 2017, and we're now in 2024 where we're supposed to be in the most inclusive, diverse, most, you know what I mean? We're supposed to be in this era where everybody has this equal opportunity and everybody, so like, and it doesn't feel like that at all. Where we have a cabaret license that was clearly presented to be not effective and just racially inclined, and it's just thriving out here in Albany with no issue. So that's very disappointing. Just, I want to end on that note. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of the speakers from the public who came out and spoke on this issue today. You know, we do appreciate your time and your energy. We will be taking that up later on today. You know, we will be discussing that bill as part of our agenda. So if you wish to stay, that will be something we discuss today. Don't know how long it will take us to get there, but just it is on our agenda. Okay, so first we have ordinance 66, 11124. Can we have the representatives from Trinity come up, speak to us about your project, as well as the planning department? Are you guys on this one too? Okay. So if you just please give us some information about the ordinance and why it's needed.
So Trinity Alliance is currently located at 15 Trinity Place. That property is currently zoned as mixed-use neighborhood, MUNE, and they acquired, I'm not sure of the year, 31 Trinity, where Trinity Church used to be. It's an empty lot right now, and for future development purposes, we would like that zoning to be changed to MUNE, because right now it is currently zoned as residential townhouse, I believe, so R2.
Okay, any more information from planning, please?
Sorry, just bear with me one moment.
We're doing,
you. Okay, so just pulling up an image of the property that we see here. So outlined, if we're looking at the left-hand side, outlined is parcel, this is 31 Trinity, and then we can see to the right of that is the existing building at 15. Also the image on the right just showing the vacant lot that's there that used to house the Trinity Church that had previously been there. Here is a copy of the proposed zoning map. So again, this would take the, if we look at the map on the left-hand side, this is the existing zoning. So the parcel outlined in red is 31 Trinity, which is currently the RT zoning district. If you're looking at the map on the right-hand side, it would bring the adjacent MUNE zoning district over to include this 31 Trinity place. The need for this would be related to an expansion of the use, which currently would not be permitted in the RT zoning district. So the zoning map amendment is necessitated by the need to rebuild on this property and provide a use and function to this lot along with the adjacent property. When comparing the RT and MUNE zoning districts, there are a lot of similarities. Obviously, there's differences with one being a residential zoning district and the proposed zoning district being commercial. The MUNE is the lowest intensity of the mixed-use districts. It has a lot of the same similarities and a lot of the same uses, permitted and not permitted, that are reflected within the RT zoning district. It's also, should be noted that the MUNE and the RT zoning districts are typically found adjacent to one another throughout the city. So they share a lot of those same characteristics, and oftentimes the uses allowed within the MUNE zoning district are meant to be essentially complementary to the RT, since they are often found directly next to each other. And in this case, in terms of the other regulations for dimensional restrictions, the MUNE would allow for the redevelopment of this lot with providing the appropriate height, buildable lot area, and other dimensional characteristics.
Okay. Any additional information, Madam Chair? No? Any questions from committee members? Councilwoman Seaman, and then Councilmember Howie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. Does Trinity Alliance have any plans currently for that lot?
Yes, so in one of the previous slides, that is a rendering of the addition that will be on that lot. There is a connector piece that's set back a little further, but to the right you see a sliver of a brick building. That's the existing Trinity Alliance building.
Yeah, so that's currently where the vacant lot is now, and that brick building was to the right.
All right, I wasn't sure if that was an example or if that was actually what you're rendering. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Howie?
Thank you. Thank you. I tried to look up Trinity Alliance on the web, and I got an error that, they might be trying to steal my data. So I apologize. But can you just briefly just talk about what Trinity Alliance does?
Sure. Trinity Alliance is a more than 112-year organization. It's a community-based organization. Provides various services from health and wellness. Also, we have alternatives to incarceration division. We have youth development. And we have community network services. And we provide also services for those who are homeless and looking to rent or lease. And also we provide the individuals with connections to the resources in the community, Department of Social Services and other agencies that can help them to improve their standard of living and quality of life.
Thank you, and I appreciate the work that you're doing.
There's also a food pantry as well, and it's known as the emergency food shelter in the Albany area because it's open 24 hours.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee members? Councilmember Hyde.
Not really a question, just want to say that I'm in support of this application. I think this is exactly when we should be looking at zoning district changes and amendments when you have a vacant parcel. You know, I find the RT district on a vacant parcel extremely restrictive, considering it's for a row townhouse and the, you know, chances of building up, you know, residential townhouse right up against the existing doesn't seem very likely. So just wanted to state that I am in support of this, and I think where you have a existing zoning district at MUNE to extend it out to allow for this orderly development makes a lot of sense. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee members? Any questions from non-committee members? Okay. With that said, is there a motion to move ordinance 66, 111, 24 out of committee with a positive recommendation?
I'd like to make a motion to move, just got to pull back up the reference number. Sorry.
66, 111, 24.
I'd like to make a motion to move ordinance 66.111.24 out of committee with a positive recommendation.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Councilmember Seymour. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone against? Okay, is that unanimous? Okay, sounds good. Passed with unanimous consent. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for the work you do for our city.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have ordinance 279124. I'm going to allow the sponsor to speak on the ordinance. Councilmember Al-Nani?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So, you know, Albany's facing a housing crisis right now. No matter where you live, rent is going up every single day. And we wanted to make sure that we are creating more housing opportunities for residents all across our city, no matter where you live. And that is the impetus of working on this legislation. This ordinance seeks to increase the number of potential benefits of the USDO, particularly when it comes to affordable housing incentives, by removing certain restrictions to its use and reducing the number of required off-street parking. This legislation will allow small-scale developers to provide smaller-scale affordable housing in a greater number of areas in our city, quite frankly, promoting more inclusive housing, et cetera. So I know we talked about this the last meeting, and I hope that individuals can support this. Thank you.
Give us 1 second as we clarify some information. Okay, just for clarification, so we're going to split this bill because there was two concepts of the bill. One was the inclusionary housing, the affordable housing incentive, and then the other had the accessory dwelling component. So we're going to split the bill so that what we vote on is just the affordable housing incentive and split the accessory dwelling to its own bill for us to discuss separately, but not hold up this portion of the ordinance. Is that favorable with the sponsor.
Yes, I am in support of that, but I just want to be clear about something. If you have amendment recommendations, please push it forward. But if you are saying no for the sake of saying no, I just want to be on record saying that there are over 10 council members that are in support of this legislation. So I'm giving committee members some opportunity to come up with a recommendation. But if you want to vote no, because your constituents want you to vote no, that is fine. But just don't hold up the legislation. So I will separate it. This legislation is supported by the mayor and 10 other council members. So if you have amendments that you want to make, please set them forward. But if you just want to vote no for the sake of voting no, when it comes on the floor, you can vote no.
Well, I appreciate Councilmember Anani's willingness to split this. I will say this, when the new bill comes up for the accessory dwelling unit solo bill, we will hold a minimum of 3 meetings to be able to discuss it, get input from the public, but then on that 3rd meeting, I will call for a vote. So we will allow that. We will. Let me finish. I'm saying that just so I want you to be aware that that's the process. We'll move forward once the bill comes through, but we will put it forward for a full committee vote. Within the 3rd meeting, to make sure that this does get an up and down vote at the committee level. So we appreciate your willingness to split it, to allow one part of this to move forward, which I think is a very important part, and a part that you have been a strong ally on and a strong advocate for. So I do appreciate your work on that. Councilmember Zamer, and then Councilmember Adams, and then Councilmember Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to thank the sponsor, Councilmember Anani, for separating these 2 distinct issues into 2 different bills. For me personally, it's not an expression of that I'm for or against accessory dwellings, not at all. It's an expression of, I think the city deserves more time to discuss it, more information. I know I need more information. And that being said, I'm supportive of the of making inclusion affordable housing incentives more widely available to developers. I think that's really what this bill is about. And the accessory dwelling issue is totally separate. And I look forward to having robust discussions about it. And again, I want to thank Councilmember Anani for deciding to split these 2 bills. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Adams.
Thank you, Chair. We are facing a housing crisis. We have been having this conversation for a very long time now. I would have preferred for Councilmember Anani to have kept these 2 together, because these 2 almost go hand in hand together as incentives for developers, for people to increase housing here in our city. I can't stress enough how important it is that we support legislation that is going to allow flexibility for all types of people here in our city in regards to how we develop housing and where we invest housing at. The legislation with the incentives is very important, because we need to focus on trying to create different opportunities in different areas. Every neighborhood is different, every ward is different, but we need to at least have the option on the table for individual people to look at and decide what's best for them, what's best for their business. This legislation goes beyond that, because this council, have actually created more regulations towards housing that is more detrimental to our city than this legislation here. This is actually going in the right direction of addressing the root causes that we have, and again, expanding the flexibility around the city. I'll focus just my comments on the incentives part. because that's what we decided to do. But I support this bill. I think this is going to, again, create flexibility and opportunity for many different people of scales. This is going to help address our housing crisis in a way that we have not done before, because this has not been on the table. So I'll leave and yield my comments there and hope that the other committee members support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Clark.
Again, if you have questions, concerns, don't wait till the next committee meeting. Send them before the meeting so we could address it. So if you have amendments that you'd like to make or questions that you have, maybe we can answer it tomorrow. We shouldn't wait till the next committee meeting to answer your questions. And if you want me to come in front and speak to your neighborhood association about this, please let us know. I will make myself available.
Councilmember Clark.
Just a general comment. Committee meetings are meant to have a discussion on these things, but I do appreciate Councilmember Anani saying. Question on the off-street parking required. I didn't realize it said shall be reduced by 100%. I've got 120 plus units on Colvin Ave on one side of the park, 64 units on the other side of the park. They're not going to park on Colvin Ave. They're not going to shouldn't park in the park. They're not going to park on Central Ave. So now we're saying that if those projects came before the planning board after this was passed, that 180 plus new units wouldn't require any parking. I mean, I could see having discretion to the planning board or someone else to say may be reduced to a certain percentage, but you know, and apologize for not bringing this up sooner, but I didn't realize that was a shall be reduced as opposed to a development by development basis, whereby the planning board could look at it and say, hey, in this instance, there's sufficient off-street parking, don't have to have any parking required. So would just like to have a little discussion on that.
Okay. Can I get someone from the planning department?
Yeah, and again, this legislation is more so geared towards small-scale units, so anywhere from 5 to 10 units. Any other large development, particularly 60-plus units, they will have to go in front of the zoning board and the planning board, et cetera. So this is more geared towards small-scale development, 5 to 10 units. But
Brad?
Yeah, Councilmember Clark, were you suggesting that it should say may rather than shall, or is there just a generalized concern about the 100% reduction?
Well, I mean, when I read this, I don't see the council member's position that this only applies to small-scale development. I mean, is that accurate? Is it just missing a section in here that says this shall only be for a certain number of units?
No, I don't believe so.
I don't believe so either. So,
I mean, the code does have references to transportation demand management plans. If there was a desire to submit that language, I think that would be an apt way to consider the holistic impact, as well as if there are, less impact or less need for parking due to the particular incomes of the residents there. I mean, I think we know that, car ownership and income are correlated to some effect. But I think the goal is to reduce the cost of construction. But I do understand, again, we're not expecting someone is going to build 180 units without parking. I don't think that's likely to happen, but there could be adequate safeguards. And we're looking for an alternative tonight. I would suggest some reference to that transportation demand management language that's already in the code.
yeah, I mean, it's the shall. So if I'm a developer and I come in and you tell me that I have to have parking, and they point to this and it says that it shall be reduced by 100%,
I think shall is perhaps not the right word. I think may would be a better word, but I don't know if that fully addresses your concern. So I'm just proposing that other option as well.
Yeah, I just think every, Councilmember Adams said every ward district, is different. So there could be an instance where you have a development that's closer to transportation, closer to more off-street parking, that makes sense to reduce it. So that's just, like I said, I hadn't realized the shall term until looking at it again
Can I ask a clarifying question on this exact?
Yeah, give me 1 second. So just a quick question for Councilmember Clark. If the sponsor was acceptable of changing the word from child to may, is that something that would make you feel more comfortable with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think at least that gives the planning board discretion to look at what is the development and what's around it, and what other opportunities there are for transportation.
Okay. Is that something that you're acceptable to? Okay, but Councilmember Nani is accepting changing from child to may. Councilmember Samer, thank you.
Thank you. So it's my understanding when I read this that Councilmember Anani's legislation gives, the parking intent is to restrain developers a little less. So if there was a development opportunity close to public transportation without a need for parking, they could choose not to. But they could also choose to have parking. Is that, am I reading that correctly? It's up to the discretion?
Yeah, I think this language does make clear, though, that they should be considering, they should have that, you know, particularly as Councilmember Anani said, that the smaller projects, I mean, the fiscal impact is going to be more for those. So this, in a certain way, is going to help those more and give them a little bit more flexibility on the side of parking. I don't know if that directly answered your question.
Yeah, it seems common sense to me that a developer is not going to build a large-scale development without parking. If there's no parking around, that's not going to be attractive to potential renters.
When Buffalo updated their zoning code maybe a couple of years before ours, they did away with parking requirements altogether. People still build parking in Buffalo.
Yeah,
they still talk about it at planning board
that's what
meetings.
We're moving
so it's
towards.
not correct.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding that correctly.
So I'm gonna have you go over that. Okay, any other questions for our planning department? Any questions from non-committee members? Okay, so I'm gonna have our legal counsel explain how we're gonna split this properly. Jake, you're on.
Well, so my understanding, and I apologize because I've been in and out, is that the council would like to recommend a portion of it. So I think the optimal way to do that would be to recommend it with an amendment, or pending amendment, as we normally do. And then the council can also separately, this would be a separate motion, recommend the introduction of a separate portion. Now, that recommendation will only hold as far as the language. That recommendation would only be okay because we have all that language fully drafted, and if that language were to change in a future amendment, the recommendation of the council would no longer hold, so we would need to have another committee meeting to reconsider that language. The council should also be aware that we started a type 1 secret review for this legislation at the last meeting. That will have to be bifurcated into 2 separate secret reviews.
Okay.
So can just...
Councilwoman Samer.
Thank you.
And then Clark.
So we can consider this legislation striking section 2?
Yeah, so what you would do is you would move to advance the legislation with a favorable recommendation pending the amendment of striking section 2, if that's what you'd like to do. And then you could do a separate motion for the committee recommending the introduction of new legislation that would consist of section 2.
Which we're not prepared to consider tonight. You have to consider the separate legislation.
Well, it will need to be introduced, it will need to go through the procedure, but what you can do is, since the language exists right now, you could hypothetically give a pending recommendation for it, but if that language were to change in future legislative process, you would need to issue a new recommendation.
Would that need to be reintroduced by the sponsor at the next full meeting?
Yes, but what you would be doing is recommending the introduction of legislation in a specific form. Basically, since the language is all out there and exists for the committee to review, and you've had time to review it, it's okay to recommend the specific introduction and have it essentially like a pre-approval. But this is
a pre-approval of
the specific introduction because you have that language now. recommendations of the committee really comes down to the council's intent. So if you have this piece of legislation and you are recommending its introduction and passage, you can recommend that for that separate piece of legislation.
Okay. I just want to be clear that we would have an opportunity to treat the separate piece of legislation on accessory dwelling separately, and we'll have time to discuss it in future committee meetings.
Well, so you should make it clear what you'd like to do, because you can separate it and consider it as its own, or you can recommend its introduction and approve it.
It seems, I think the bottom line is that we need to consider the accessory dwelling legislation separately.
So, okay, I'm sorry, let me just, and I apologize.
No,
Councilmember
explain, please.
So I'm going to recommend we do this, and I've spoken with Councilmember Anani, and he seems to be accepting of it. I would recommend we move forward with ordinance 2791-24 with section 2 striking from the bill, and the remaining of the bill, except for section 3, number 5, number 5B, I1, where shall get changed to may. We move forward with a passive recommendation. Is that something we can do?
I believe you might want to strike out everything except section 3 if we're moving forward with the incentives.
But yes, you can put out a recommendation pending specific amendments, the removal of those specific sections.
So
you can do that entirely independently of the other thing I said, which is recommending a potential introduction.
So just to be clear, you're saying we should strike everything down except section 3. Is that correct?
Yeah, it looks like everything else was connected specifically to the ADUs, whereas
Okay. So just to be clear,
unless planning has thoughts on section 4, if that was to be included as well. But section 1 amends the permitted use table, which as of right now does not have accessory dwelling units as a permitted use, so we would want, if we're separating it, we would not want to include section 1.
Section 4. Okay. So while we let Brad and the plan department, are you guys ready to make a statement?
I think section 1 and 2 are one bill, and then 3 and 4 are another. That's what we're talking about, right? Correct. Yeah, we're agreeable.
Okay. So then we'll be looking to move forward with striking section 1 and 2 in this bill, and move forward with section 3 and 4. And then Councilmember Nani could put in a new bill for section 1 and 2, and it will start flushing you through the process. Does that work for everybody? Does that work for you?
I don't want to do it, but I'll do it because I know there are some people out there that are waiting, so that works for me.
Okay. And I appreciate that, and allows us to move some of this forward. 1 second, Councilmember Clark, no, you're good? Councilmember Hovey.
Everything was good, except when we just talked about it, you didn't mention the may, shall to may.
No, I agree with that. So, just to be clear, we're going to move forward with ordinance 2791-24, striking section 1 and 2, moving forward for a vote for section 3 and 4, but in section 3, section 3, number 5, paragraph B, section I, we're going to strike the word shall and replace it with a may. Is that accurate with what everybody's interpretation is? Okay. Is that acceptable by our legal team? Acceptable by our sponsor? Okay, excellent. So, any other questions? If not, I'll ask if there's a motion to move forward with a passive recommendation for ordinance 2791-24 with the amendments of striking section 1 and section 2, and on section 3, 5BI, striking the word shall and putting the word may.
I'll make a motion to move ordinance 279124, pending the striking of section 1 and 2, moving forward with section 3 and 4, changing the word shall to may. In which section is that?
Section 3, 5B.
Section 3, 5E?
B.
B. Did I say that correctly? With a favorable recommendation.
I think it's been conveyed, the specific section that we're trying to amend.
Okay, do I get a second? Do I have a second? Second by Councilmember Adams. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so that moves forward, and I appreciate everyone's time on that, and I appreciate Councilmember Anani's willingness to work to get this through. So thank you for that. Next, we've got the cabaret licensing. So I'm going to allow the sponsors to present some amendments that they have for us. Not sure if the planning department stays for that one. No, yes. Are you here for the plan? For the
I just want to say I think the public speaker covered a lot of what we would have said in one way or another on both sides. So I don't, unless you have questions for us, I think they covered it. So thanks.
Okay. So I'll allow the sponsors to take the floor and present the amendments that they have for us.
I'll say a few words first.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I just want to thank all the comments, all the emails we received today. There was a lot, and that's what democracy is about, listening to all sides of the story, and that's what this legislation was originally intent was to get a discussion going about it, and that's what me and Sergio talked about, was getting a discussion about it. I just want to let people know, and the public know about the process. You know, we had a meeting already. We listened to some concerns. Sergio and I listened to some concerns. So then what we did was we met with the mayor's team, our attorneys. We met with Faye Andrews with the Neighborhood Engagement Department, attorneys for the City of Albany, and we sat down right over on that table about a month ago, and we listened to the ideas. So we asked that our attorneys, Jake and Brian and the mayor's attorney, come up with a legislation based on what we heard. So this is the first version. This is what we heard. Means we just read it a few days ago, maybe. So it was new to us, and I'm glad we have this meeting now to discuss the pros and cons of what we need to do. It's just the first version. We're going to have Jake and Brian, the attorneys, explain all the changes that they made, why they did what they did, and we'll go from there. And Sergio.
Thank you. So to follow up on Council Member Flynn's remarks there, just to provide context and re-jog everyone's memory, we started this conversation back in the summertime in June. And during that conversation in time, the concerns coming from business owners and people who were looking to open a business was the issue with the application process for applying for a cabaret license. That was the original issue that we were looking to address. The amount of departments that were a part of the process, the length and time that business owners had to wait in order to get a response back to know if they were approved or not. These were some of the issues that we originally set out to address. This legislation today does exactly just that part by removing that long application process away, allowing business owners to have the right to be able to provide entertainment for their people. The legislation also addresses the fact that we had to wait for business owners to then get their license. When it was time to renew, go through hearings, have people not show up for hearings. We're wasting time. We were wasting a lot of people's time during that process. One of the things that stood out to me during our comments this evening was the fact that we had people come in to this meeting, and we've been having meetings for several months. While I appreciate and want to continue to hear other people's feedback, I have to remind everyone that out of the past 4 months, not only have we had conversations here, we've had committee meetings. I have gone to speak at several neighborhood associations with Lark Street, Delaware Avenue, Washington Avenue, various neighborhood associations, speaking, meeting, taking time personally with business owners, with lawyers, with all types of people who had any type of interest in this legislation, not to mention the amount of media coverage that this topic has received. Throughout this time, people have not provided any major recommendations as to how to deal with the noise or the enforcement. Because as I mentioned, the purpose we set out was to address the application process and making this fair for people to obtain. So while I understand the concerns for neighborhoods, people who live close to bars, this legislation was not meant to address those concerns. So we have an issue with nuisance and loud noise. We understand that and we hear you. But this legislation is, one, not complete. It's only in draft form, and the goal of this legislation was not intended to address the noise. We then have the conversation around enforcement. How is this going to be enforced? How are business owners going to feel protected after going through years of an inconsistent, unfair process? These are things that business owners are looking for clarity on. To me, it's very simple. I agree with them that setting a decibel level, which clearly states, what's reasonable and what's not, is the best way to go. However, when we're dealing with legislation can get very complicated because, as I mentioned, we're dealing with several different issues. We're having the discussion on now the application process, the conversation on noise ordinance, and a conversation on enforcement. These things, while they go together, it is not being packaged in this legislation to address those issues. So please understand that tonight, the conversation here was to address the application process and making it more expedient, or removing it like we are doing or planning to do, to make it more fair for business owners. That is the original intent. And for other questions regarding the accessory definition and what's included, those things have changed. We have opportunity to amend certain things, but at the end of the day, these are the basic uses that people are coming to us for. We have been provided with a list of businesses that apply for a cabaret license. This conversation is not just about nightlife, bars, and taverns. There's other businesses who apply throughout the year to use a cabaret license, some of which don't even make sense. Why would Emac and Bolio's, an ice cream shop, need to get a cabaret license? Are we assuming that the noise and volume coming from an ice cream shop is going to be unreasonable? Are we expecting that just regular stores, restaurants who normally don't play music are all of a sudden, with this legislation, going to become unruly and become the wild, wild west? That's fear-mongering to the utmost, because the nightlife here is one part, but this legislation is trying to address businesses as a whole in the entire city. So again, this evening, as we continue to have more discussions about this conversation, I'm hoping that our staff is able to clarify and clear up some of the questions that people have. But as I mentioned, this evening, this legislation is not to address the noise. It's not to address the enforcement beyond addressing the issues that would come up if an incident was to happen in one of these places. And so again, we're open to critiques, we're open to having further conversation. But tonight, I want council committee members here to really understand and focus what the original intentions were, what you're reading, and how that is then going to be applied to businesses here in the city. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Samer, and after that, I'm gonna allow for the presentation of by our staff.
Okay, thank you. Maybe your presentation will answer my question. I just want to say that I really do appreciate Councilmembers Flynn and Adams bringing this issue to light, and the business owners and residents who came to speak tonight, who all seem to agree that we need to come to some balance, and everybody seemed to be at least on the same page about that. I have a question about what Councilmember Adams just said, that the intent of this legislation is of the permitting, the application, just focus on the application process. That's just not what I see. So maybe that's not what I see. I see standard of sound, enforcement. So maybe you guys can explain. Thank you.
Okay.
I
Let's
do
get
believe
going
we're-
with the presentation, and then if there's any other questions, we can go into the questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I do believe we addressed that in the presentation. But just as a high-level summary, we're eliminating the application process. Businesses would be able to operate by right. So if they, say you have a cultural restaurant, they wanted to have a band come in to play some music from their home country, that would technically require a cabaret license today. And if that was just for like a national holiday, this would allow that restaurant to just go ahead and do it, for instance.
I think that, yeah, even prior to this, like a lot of the restrictions were already in the noise ordinance, and the noise ordinance is still as it is now. I know that the committee is preparing to look at it again, and that was something that was put on hold while this has been considered. So I think that a lot of those discussions, even after this is had, will continue to happen. Particularly like more strict decibel discussions, I think, are pending regardless of what happens on this.
All right, well, thank you all. Fun being on this side of it again. So we took a look at the cabaret law as it is, and we noted a couple of deficiencies, some which were brought up by members of the public, others which we found ourselves. The definition captures any and all forms of entertainment provided by establishments selling food to the public, except for that one oddly constructed section, which relates to a centralized audio system, including jukeboxes. It's an overbroad classification that seems to capture almost every establishment, except for some of your...
I'll talk a bit more about those on the next slide.
It does also require significant administrative overhead. So beyond work that the city clerk's office has to do with regards to issuing the licenses, it is itself a time-consuming and arduous process. As I've mentioned, with an establishment that was hoping to just have a one-time event in a year, they would have to go through the entire process to be permitted for that event. It delegates unrestricted and non-transparent rulemaking authority to 5 city officials, and it essentially duplicates those regulatory reviews. It requires yearly renewal with no guarantee or timeline for approval. The license is non-transferable, so if I operate a bar or restaurant and I wish to sell my business, the cabaret license does not transfer with that. I cannot sell it and guarantee that the next owner can hold their events. And then one other thing I don't believe had been mentioned, but licenses cannot be provided to convicted felons. Anybody who has served their time, works in the food industry, works their way up, ends up managing, owning a restaurant, they would not be able to provide what we would be terming accessory entertainment, just for clarity, for their patrons.
So To discuss a little bit about the definition, this is as it currently is, and it is incredibly broad. There are many things that you would have never considered to be a cabaret, which aren't really being looked at as cabaret, but under the plain text definition of the law would be. One of the common ones I like to bring up, a comedy club would be a cabaret, or even a bar trivia night could potentially be a cabaret. You know, you're talking about it's not musical entertainment, but it's another form of entertainment that's going to be done by, you know, you'll have an MC on a mic, especially if you have more than 3 people who are passing the things out, suddenly the bar trivia night's a cabaret. So this certainly wasn't the intention when this was drafted, but business owners don't always have a lawyer on hand to comb through this and figure out whether they are or aren't a cabaret. And this has been an issue in many situations. We've heard stories of a radio station that was stopped because they had snacks at an event. Now that wouldn't be a definition under this because the food isn't the primary purpose of the place, but the confusion invites issues. Another crazy one in my mind that would be a cabaret, if you had 4 Salvation Army people ringing bells in front of a Walmart, the bell's an amplification device that's outside of a place whose primary purpose is food. And you'll see there's an exception for an eleemosynary, which means charitable purpose of the institution, but the supermarket isn't a charitable place for the Salvation Army, so that exception wouldn't apply. So all of these are very complicated and not really what we want the business owners in the city to be combing through when they're trying to decide whether they want to have a band over for that day.
So then we get to administrative overhead. So the city clerk is required to hold a public hearing on every single application. These public hearings rarely receive public comment. They require mailing notices to property owners within 100 feet of the applicant's property. They create additional time delays. The public hearing needs to be noticed within 30 days of notifying council members, but when we have to go and notice these meetings, make sure that that property owners are able to attend, which is another issue with that. We're compelling business owners and operators away from their business during normal operating hours. And these meetings only really serve to work through the application that the applicant submitted. The city clerk is also, sometimes unfortunately, the recipient of all community concerns for relaying city official decisions. They are sort of the one-stop shop for the city, and anytime, say, a letter that was supposed to be delivered by USPS was supposed to be delivered, the city clerk's office receives those complaints if it wasn't. So the rulemaking authorities, we have the city clerk, the chief planning official, the chief of police, the fire chief, and the director of buildings and regulatory compliance. Each of these people are authorized and directed to promulgate such reasonable rules and regulations as he or she may deem necessary for the proper control, operation, and supervision of cabarets. So there's no requirement that these rules and regulations are publicly noticed. The city clerk's responsibilities include duplicating the review of a lot of these officials. The licensing process itself does not discuss noise levels. That's something that...
Yeah, and I would add, this really creates a black box where the clerk becomes the messenger and people think that she's making those decisions when really she's simply relaying the verdict of the police department or fire department, which are making these to I believe we had a comment which discussed how, rulemaking process should be transparent. But it currently is an incredible black box. Like, I think simplifying the amount of organizations that are involved in the rulemaking process will make it much more efficient. Also, there are several of these, I believe buildings and regulatory compliance doesn't often even submit anything because most of the things that they would be concerned of were previously inspected for when the building occupancy permit was granted in the first place. So it's strange that often the clerk will be just forced to sit around waiting for a response that she's convinced will never come, but she is unable to release a decision until she's received that from all parties.
Touching back onto the guarantee of issuance, The city clerk is required to wait until she has written consent from all of the parties. These establishments, as has been stated, these establishments were inspected, their conditions reviewed. Some agencies do not always respond in a timely manner, so we're talking about potentially months of a business owner waiting for the confirmation that their application, or the decision on their application. And there's no timeline in the cabaret law as it is for when those decisions need to be rendered. We touched on the non-transferability of it. Just to reiterate, this reduces the value of the business because they're not able to guarantee that the functions that they're hosting are going to be able to continue. And the felon prohibition. A large number of released individuals do enter into accommodation and food services. 30% female, this is based off a study from 2010, 30% female formerly incarcerated, 26% of people of Asian, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander descent, and 23% of employed persons released at age 20 or younger, 24 or younger. Being able to work in an industry that doesn't necessarily judge and accepts your history, your past, and provides you an opportunity for growth, that helps to reduce recidivism, and the current licensing system works against that.
All right, so now we're finally moving to the new ordinance, but there was a lot to talk about the system as it is. So a lot has been made of the reasonable person standard, and it is an important discussion to have. I would disagree with a lot of the discourse that it is arbitrary, because it is a long-standing legal principle that judges, there is lots and lots of case law on, there's lots of writing on what makes a person reasonable. It's also, for instance, it goes back to the 1800s in English case law, but there are hundreds of cases in case law all across the country, from New York to Minnesota, everywhere. And even in New York, a lot of municipalities use reasonable person for their noise ordinances and/or cabaret. As you can see, a bunch of ones that are pretty close to home. So this isn't some like arcane, strange way that people don't do. In fact, our current noise ordinance heavily relies on, I believe we say unusual, but that's very close to unreasonable in terms of how courts will analyze that requirement. So when we're talking about the pros and cons of reasonable person standard, I definitely think this is a conversation that we'll have more of in the coming days, but it allows for consideration of more unique situations and adapting to changing conditions, but as people have brought up, it does open up possibilities of inequitable enforcement if the people who are administering it aren't doing it well. There's also concerns that decibel brings into this as well. For instance, entering people's residences, you'll need BRC to go into people's houses. What happens if somebody has their bedroom window open so more noise is coming in that way? Is that, can the BRC person demand to go into the person's bedroom before taking it in? So I definitely think that there are reasons to have that conversation, because a decibel measurement is going to be a more standard discussion, but it might be a more difficult measurement for the BRC officers to actually make. So that's definitely a conversation that I believe we'll have in the coming days. But I also believe it was brought up that BRC, there were concerns about enforcement, but building regulatory compliance are already going in and issuing stop work orders.
Just also want to make a quick note that BRC also forwarded concerns related to this, and ideally when this legislation ultimately passes, they would like to remove code enforcement officers from the enforcement aspects of this and have it just be APD. I just wanted to share that, as that was a concern of theirs.
That said, they are currently enforcing the noise ordinance as it's done. I understand that they would rather be less involved in that as well. It's a precarious situation. I know recently we had the legislation about additional punishments for people who harass and threaten codes officers. So that I understand why they would want to be distanced from that. But as Councilmember Adams said, this isn't a major reform of how they're currently doing things. This is more looking at the licensure system. I know we had already mentioned that there's proposals for looking into the noise ordinance again in the future. So that might be conversations to have there as well.
And just a quick note on stop work orders being mentioned. It's the main mechanism by which BRC enforces regulations in the USDO, with the inclusion of violations of the noise ordinance added as a, I believe it was use specific, or but a condition for accessory entertainment that they do not violate the noise ordinance. That would make it their responsibility to enforce the law. So we do know that there were also some concerns noted in some of the public comment that we'd received on the Department of Neighborhood and Community Services. We thought that it would be best for the department to have some flexibility with designing a system to take in concerns about violations. One potential option they could explore would be say click fix. And we do want to note that there can be there's inflexibility in structuring public comment through legislation. I think we would want to, if we were moving in that direction, we'd want to consider language that allows us a little bit more room there, because that would ultimately actually benefit participation.
I worry that mandating the exact process will leave us where we are right now with this burdensome public hearing that is during business hours, that the clerk doesn't have flexibility to adjust even if nobody is going to show up, for instance. So the people who will be dealing with these situations and will say, okay, we've had 4 of these hearings already, and it would be better if we did X, Y, and Z to make them more efficient, more transparent, more open, whatever. That's going to be information that the people doing these hearings will have, and letting them have rulemaking authority for that, I think will allow those hearings to be more efficient. Though I understand if we want to put in minimum requirements for those hearings as well. I think that that's acceptable, but I also think it is important to give them some amount of flexibility in how it is run.
And then just the final addition to the ordinance, through our discussions, we settled on finally the Board of Zoning Appeals as the appropriate place to be handling appeals for stop work orders that are issued in relation to the operation of accessory entertainment. The board would be empowered to reduce the stop work order to a warning, which would impact the prohibition process by letting the operators have essentially another strike. They get a strike back from the process. We didn't put that into this presentation, but we're happy to discuss the 4 strikes in 2 years process.
Yeah, the BZA as it exists is the current appropriate body for appealing things like, or BRC orders such as stop work orders. So we thought that as such it made sense to be the appeals body. Also, they have lots of experience with appeals. So their experience at being fair and understanding the emotions that are often in these situations. And then as Brian had said, so the system that we had devised, the stop work order cap, the reason for that is it's a self-correcting system. So if an individual has a lot of violations, they're going to have a long ban period, but if they had one that was a while ago, it'll disappear more quickly. I think that the exact number is something that was up for discussion. I don't think that 4 strikes for 2 years is the only way to do it. There wasn't a study that we read that said this is the appropriate number. But if and if people think that we need to be stricter on it, then we can raise the number, we could either raise or lower the number of strikes, and we can raise or lower the amount of time. So I think it's a very flexible standard, but we'll have to decide what we actually want that number to be.
Okay. Committee members, questions? Councilmember Hyde. Clark, sorry about that.
Did you look at, in terms of the noise regulation, how it interplays with the current peace and good order regulations that we have? I'm not sure why we would target a bar different from a house party and have different enforcement, different measures. I mean, noise is a concern for everybody. It doesn't have to be targeted to a cabaret license.
So that honestly was the concept behind the additional full repeal, that noise ordinance covers the concerns naturally, and if it's not in violation of the noise ordinance, it shouldn't matter. But I understand that people wanted a more complicated or more detailed, more detailed compromise. I shouldn't say complicated.
Okay. I guess just concern from what we heard in public comments of not having a standard. I think currently, not even the cabaret license aspect, not having a standard for neighbors and noise concerns. So it would be interesting to see a change in that.
So we had received from Corporation Council a proposed update to the noise ordinance. We are going to be taking another look at that and revising it regardless of what happens with this. I believe that it was tabled because we wanted to figure out what we were going to do with cabaret and accessory entertainment before we made a noise ordinance that wouldn't fit in with it, because it would be amending a lot of similar things. If we were to do a full repeal, we could include everything in the noise ordinance. I think that's an effective way to do it, but it would just be a different way to do it.
Okay, we've got Councilmember Adams, then Councilwoman Samer, then Councilmember Hoey.
Yeah, just to reiterate again, we're having three different discussions. Again, the cabaret was not to address noise. That's never what it was for. The cabaret is to allow establishment venues to be able to have entertainment. That is it. The noise ordinance is the concern that most community people or people who have been speaking or council members here have been mentioning. That is totally separate. That's a separate conversation. And as Jake mentioned, we are working towards the noise ordinance and redoing that. This does not stop that from happening. We can do this first and then work on the noise ordinance to make sure it is in line with everything, because at least at that point, we will know how businesses who are operating with entertainment are functioning. It makes more sense this way. It allows us to, again, have more time to flush out the noise ordinance and how that's going to work, which will be more inclusive of these various activities that may happen on a weekend compared to a weeknight, compared to a weekday. So just wanted to reiterate that, because again, tonight this conversation is about the application process and making it easier, simplified for people to have entertainment. Thank you.
Councilmember Samer?
Thank you, Chairman. And Councilmember Adams' point, I understand it, you've made it, absolutely. It's a separate conversation, but in, out of respect for the residents that who conflate the two, and they are connected, I'm hoping that we can make sure that the public understands that changing or repealing whatever it is we decide to do does not mean that we're condoning any sort of level of noise. So my question is sort of piggybacking on Councilmember Clark about what is the recourse in the noise ordinance, which I know is going to, we have to work on it. But let's say that we, this ordinance, this proposed ordinance is accepted, and the cabaret licensing is out the window, and so are a lot of the sort of antiquated parts of this law. How would a person, what would their recourse be if they are having an issue with noise from a business?
Yeah, so Jason's pulling up the noise ordinance right now, but my understanding is it's enforced via stop work orders generally. There's also fines for...
Like, would the public,
here we go.
something we have to define? Would they register their complaint through See-Click-Fix or call APD? I just want to know if there's something in place before we get rid of this.
Sure, so here, I have the enforcement section of the noise ordinance pulled up. So any person violating any provisions of this article may be first issued a verbal or written warning of violation by any police officer or other person authorized hereunder, who shall require that that violation immediately cease if the violator, upon demand, fails to comply, or for a second violation by the same violator within a 30-day period. Such violator shall, upon fiction of thereof, be guilty of a violation and subject to penalties provided in another section of the article. And any person who observes or has knowledge of a violation of this article may file a signed deposition under oath with a police officer specifying the objectionable conduct, date thereof, name and address. The police officer shall investigate each complaint. If the complaint is supported by probable cause, issue a notice of violation thereof. And then the chief of police may promulgate such rules and regulations as may be necessary to carry out the provisions of this section. So
APD.
And I believe APD, the person authorized hereunder is, the other person authorized hereunder is probably the buildings and codes people. But we can check with that.
All right, thanks.
Councilmember Hoey.
Thank you, Chair. During several times I've heard reference to New York City, and actually I had a student that worked for me, became a councilman down in New York City, Benjamin Callos, and I asked him what happened, and I just want to read what he said because I think it's sort of relevant, and because a lot of people were saying, you know, what New York City did. He goes, when we passed the cabaret law repeal, it got a lot of attention from Rolling Stones magazine, etc., and other press. I was concerned that every place with a liquor license was going to turn into a dance club. That did not occur. Zoning and physical constraints and noise regulations really determine whether it will be a ruckus dance club. So if I were you, as part of the repeal, I would make sure that you've got noise limits, hours, and other restrictions, especially if you're in the parts that covers the state or Quayle Street. So I just wanted to get that out there that, you know, people were all worried about the repeal, but it seems like they were able to deal with it. I was really shocked with the presentation about the felon. And, you know, I agree 100% that, you know, a person does their time and is, you know, reformed, we got to give them a chance. We got, you know, to keep the recidivity out. So I think we're getting close. I think we need to make it easier, and any way we can do that, we really need to work on. So thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from any other council members? Any other questions from any other committee members? I did have one question that I'll ask staff publicly. So we did get a concern about the revised bill being broader than the current policy, and that it would be affecting more individuals, even individuals that are not looking towards getting a cabaret license. Can you address that concern?
Yeah, so I would counter with what I had said earlier about the old definition being so insanely broad that the only benefit is that I don't think it's being properly enforced. As I mentioned, I think Salvation Army, I think bar trivia, I think a comedy club, all of those things would be banned under the current definition. And the reason, basically, we just decided to be more blunt that it was that broad.
There is also the situation that there is kind of a gap in the USDO when you're looking at it and trying to figure out what fits in with sort of accessory entertainment. To go back to the example of sort of an enterprise that doesn't really sell food or drink, with enforcement already targeting them, there is already an understanding amongst our codes individuals that they would require a cabaret license. So it's kind of just an acknowledgement of the realities that exist right now.
Okay. Can you just go over briefly how you could address a bad actor or someone who's not, being a good neighbor?
Sure. So in the event, it would occur rather similar to how it is now, as somebody would call out a buildings and codes officer or the police officer, and they would come and they would give a warning, as you saw in the noise ordinance, and if the person refused to reduce the noise, then they would issue a stop work order. Now that stop work order will be for 12 hours. That means that they would not be able to continue to perform music for that evening. They would be able to once again have that entertainment the next day, but they would be prevented, and they would still be able to continue their normal operation, their non-accessory use for the remainder of the night. Then that would be that, unless there was another occurrence, and there, the current number was 4 in 2 years, but that number can be changed. Once an individual has reached that many violations, they're automatically barred from operating that accessory use until that period tolls. So, however, each of those individual violations can be appealed. So, hypothetically, you have violation 1, violation 2, I have it appealed, violation 3, violation 4, well, violation 2 is overturned, so that doesn't exist. So now I only have the 3 strikes. If I got the 4th, I'll be banned until 2 years from that first strike, and then I'll only have 3. So it will automatically expire for people who have done their time. However, it will, in that case, only expire, only their 4th strike will expire. So they'll be on a sort of probational period where a single strike will then get them over that threshold. So, excuse me. So I believe it automatically adjusts in that way.
Okay, so just to clarify, so if someone calls and complains and police find that the music is loud and they give them a warning and they don't comply with the warning, then they can give them a stop work order. They're shut down for that day, and that's 1 strike.
Yes.
And then, let's say the next day, it's the same thing, and they get another strike.
Yes.
And then let's say the following week, it's the same thing. On a Friday, they get a strike, and on a Saturday, they get a 2nd strike.
Right.
So now they've gotten 4 strikes in 2 weeks.
And they will not be allowed, well, they could certainly take any of those strikes to the Board of Zoning Appeals. If any of them would have been overturned, they would only have 3 strikes, so they would be allowed again. Additionally, after 4 years from the first strike, they'll have 3 strikes again. So at that point, they'll have 1 strike, and then the 2nd strike will pass. Then they'll have 2 strikes again.
I want to...
sorry, 2 years.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I get this. So go by my theory. 2 weeks, you've got 4 strikes, correct? At this point, I have 4 strikes. I lose my right to be able to play cabaret music, but I still have my right to operate, correct?
That would be correct, yeah.
You could still operate, so when we're talking about accessory entertainment, the key is that the entertainment is an accessory use to your establishment. So you will be barred from that accessory use, but you will not be barred from the primary use. So for instance, the bar would still be able to function as a bar, but let's say it was a sports bar that was blasting sports games ridiculously loud every night. They would lose the ability to do the sports part.
Okay, so now I'm going to open week 3. I appealed my first 2 on week 1. They said those 2 are void, so I'm back open week 3. I get another one on week 3. Week 4, I get another one.
Then you're back over 4, so you would be cut off. I think it's unlikely that these will pile up so fast. The hope is that you'll have time to appeal an individual one before you get another one right after. I think a business that is getting them so fast probably has other issues that need to be looked at.
So then my question is, at that point, now I'm in week 4. I got the first 2 weeks. The first week one, so week 1, in week 4, week 1's got voided out. Now I'm in week 4.
Yeah, okay.
So I have to wait 2 years from this day.
Yes, from the first one. And then, because once that 2 years passes, you'll only have 3. But if you were to get one more that next day, you'll have 4, though in a week it'll go down to 3.
Okay. So basically it's a 4-strike system. The zoning board hears the appeals. It doesn't mean that the appeals will be...
Yeah, the zoning board will make its own determination.
I believe we're also looking at language that would automatically reduce it to a warning if nobody were to contest either the city, if neither the city nor a member of the public were to contest the appeal, that it would be reduced to the warning instead.
And how many warnings do you get before you get a work? So is a warning like a work stop, or is it like half a strike?
Reducing an appeal to a warning would essentially be striking an appeal from the record.
So
or striking a violation.
So if I fight an appeal and no one comes to the hearing and says, you know, this is what happened.
Not even nobody comes to the hearing. Nobody emails the city with a complaint. The city, the mayor and all the common council declines to give their own opinion. Basically, if everybody waives their comment and nobody really has an opinion, the idea is then the city doesn't have to go through with empty procedure if nobody actually has an opinion on it. But there will still be time for people to give that comment. You know, it's not designed to prevent people from giving a comment. It's just if people have that opportunity and no one chooses to comment.
So how does that differ? Or if you can explain how it's differ from how now, if someone has a cabaret license and they get a complaint, what's their current process?
So currently, it has to be a public hearing. That has to be during the day. So if I had a big issue with the business, but I worked 9 to 5, and I couldn't get myself I couldn't pay for a lawyer to come in and convey my complaints, I would have less of an ability to share the issues that I have. So this version is more equitable because it opens up comments to more people. And I think the clerk can maybe speak to how common it is for people to show up to these hearings in the first place. I don't think it happens very often.
No, we typically do not have anyone show up to public hearing except for the applicant. We typically don't have any write-in comments either for establishments, so typically whoever is there, you know, myself as the clerk and then the applicant, we just run through the application.
Okay. So, just to clarify, how many complaints do you get? How many complaints do you, under the current system, does a business allowed before they lose their license?
You would only not be able to operate in accessory entertainment. The current version is 4 violations within 2 years. With the current one, it's way more complicated, right? Like, because a lot of it is that you just won't be issued the license, and then the police department might, when they're reviewing it, say that they're not going to give you the license, and you have to renew it every year. So
let's say I just got my license last week. Brand new, got my license. I'm good to go. I'm good for a year, correct?
So just
week 1, I got a complaint. At what point do you guys take away my license?
So as of right now, the cabaret license law states that the city clerk may suspend or revoke a license for conduct of the licensee, its officers, principals, directors, agents, or employees, or in a closely held corporation, stockholders, which would constitute grounds for denying the issuance or renewal of a license pursuant to this article. So if they're, upon the city clerk's review of the license holder situation, if they're violating other conditions.
So right now it could be 1 strike. Right now it could be just 1 strike. So,
Yeah, I mean, Shika, have you ever had a license be revoked?
Never.
My
And that's
understanding
because I
is
don't
while it's
receive
something that
complaint-
could
they don't
happen.
complain. They
I'm
don't.
sorry.
No one submits a complaint into the office if someone currently has an active cabaret. It's the only time I would receive a complaint is if an establishment does not have a cabaret.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, so the specific language in the code is the city clerk may suspend or revoke a license if the license violates the the requirements of the article provided. However, that the city clerk shall suspend or revoke a license upon the third violation of the licensee within 2 years of the first violation. So there is a case where they will have to revoke it, but one thing I would say is I don't think we revoke licenses because it's so hard for somebody to get a license in the first place that it's very unlikely that somebody who would be given the privilege of a license would need to have it revoked.
Okay. Any questions from committee members? Any additional questions from non-committee members? Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out today. I want to thank the public for coming. I want to thank all the members. I want to thank all the staff for all your work on this. It is a critical issue, and I look forward to the continued conversation and debate. At this moment, is there a motion to adjourn the
Motion
meeting?
to adjourn?
Is there a second to adjourn the meeting? Is there a second to adjourn the meeting? Oh, second. Second to adjourn the meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. Have a good holiday.